Hi, everybody. As Dr. Bryson said, my name is Fahad Siadat, and I live in Los Angeles. I am a performer and composer and also a conductor here. And I tend to specialize in writing for the voice. So this last week, I've been in residency at Jacksonville University, and I've had the opportunity for the last 5 days to appear and work with different students in their classes, talking to them about different aspects of the voice and composition and new music. And it's been just a real treat to kind of get to know these students and talk with them a lot about what they've been up to. So I want to share a little bit about about my work and what I'm particularly into and what we've been focusing on during this last few days. As Dr. Bryson said, the most of my focus is on new music, and this concert that he has curated is all about new and sort of innovative and adventurous music from living composers today. And for me, new music is where it's all about. It's not just because I'm a composer, although I am sort of biased like that, but it's sort of how I think about lots of different kinds of art. Like when I go and see movies, I'm usually interested in the stories that are happening today and what's feeling kind of the most. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not being heard. Let me just make sure that everything is good.
But I need him on the stream.
Let me just see.
We hear you fine in the lobby.
Oh, I'm in the lobby? Oh, okay,
Yes.
great. Well, then I will keep on going. Okay, thanks. Wonderful. So as I was saying, like when it comes to new work, like films, for instance, I'm usually interested in new stories and new filming techniques and kind of what film today looks like. I have an interest in historical film, and every now and then I enjoy going and seeing like a classic movie, to kind of see how movies used to be and how they've evolved and sort of the different ideas that they've played with. But for me, I would not be particularly interested in going to movie theaters where it's like that's 95% of what they were performing. But in the classical music world, that's sort of the world that we're dealing with, right? Like most of classical music, it's sort of embedded in the name. Most of classical music is dealing with music from at least 100 years ago, if not more. And one of the things that I really love about working in choral music in particular is it's one of the few classical mediums where a good percentage of the concerts are actually performed, like the music that's performed is by living composers. So this is still not always the case. There's always like nods to music from the Renaissance and music from the Baroque period and things like that. But in terms of, a good chunk of many concerts are done by living composers. And so I really love that for this concert, they've embraced that idea and really gotten to work exclusively with new, breathing, living music. So one of the things that I want to kind of share with you about is a little bit about my own work and the piece that you heard him to eighth on, and then some of the music that I want to share with you going forward. I'm going to do like a little bit of solo performing for you, and then that'll be a little bit of a hint to what we're going to be doing in the second half of the concert with the living meditation. And so for me, I am most interested in exploring the sort of the physicality of sound, like working with sound as a physical phenomenon, as an acoustic thing that's really in the body, as opposed to something that's a little bit abstracted or kind of separated and is more of like an intellectual activity, something that exists on paper first as music notation or the idea of music. I'm really interested in confronting and dealing with and working with music as a visceral sound experience. And so a lot of my own personal practice as a person who is both a performer and a composer, I write a lot of music for myself that is about exploring the voice and exploring the kind of the sound possibilities of the voice. And as I've been doing this over the years, I've encountered some really interesting kind of barriers and tension between traditional classical music and the kind of stuff that I was interested in. For instance, we've been talking a lot about this idea of timbre and sound and how it's not very well notatable, right? Like our sheet music is really good at showing us like the notes to play, like the pitch and the rhythms to play and other kinds of instructions, but not really dealing with the sound quality of the voice. So if I want singers to go from like, oh, to, oh, yeah, you know, or do something kind of like a little bit more wild as part of the expressiveness of the piece, that becomes a challenge to notate and become a thing in terms of like what, you know, what is possible on the what's possible on the page as part of the notation, right? So for me, I started getting away from notation and started thinking about performing more like a rock musician or a singer-songwriter or something like that. I sort of create the idea for the piece and the structure and the outline of the piece, and then I'm able to perform it because I know what it's supposed to sound like. So that's been a lot of my personal work, and in a little bit I'll share with you a piece that I've been kind of working on that's a bit of a guided improvisation that is a sort of meditation on sound and the voice. So, and also I should say too that like this isn't just an abstract sort of adventurous exploration for its own sake. The thing that I'm really interested in is using this idea of music and the physicality of sound as an opportunity to sort of explore introspectively and meditatively about myself and my own experiences and my own approach to music and to singing. I feel like so much of my early training was external, right? It was about receiving music from the outside and looking at like how to interpret it, trying to get into the composer's head, trying to understand what they were going for. And as I started writing my own music, so much of it was deeply informed by the music that I was also performing and listening to. And it wasn't exactly, I wouldn't say it was imitative necessarily. I mean, I'm sure it started off that way, and a lot of it was, you know, like similar to the things that I was most exposed to as a younger person: film soundtracks, video game soundtracks, right? I mean, these are like things where we're listening to music all the time. Not so much like traditional classical music. I didn't grow up listening to Bach and Mozart and Brahms and things like that. I grew up listening to a lot of in my like teen years, like a lot of Seattle grunge and Nirvana, you know, and like kind of hard rock and metal bands and things like that. And but you know, as I was writing music and working on it, I was kind of wrestling with what music was supposed to sound like and all these external factors that were coming inward. And instead, through this practice, I started looking more introspectively and inward and allowing those influences to sort of mesh together as they do to make, like, you know, any person is just sort of a sum of all of their experiences and their interests and their things that they've been exposed to and their desires and things like that. And I started looking inward and saying, okay, so what does that look like and what does that sound like for me as an individual, you know? So the so where was I? Oh yeah. So as part of that, like this whole performance practice has become a sort of meditative and internal exploration that's become really tied to my own spiritual practice, really, in a way. It's become a form of I would almost say like a kind of prayer, maybe. That's for me what's brought me into music in the first place, was having those sort of internal and like spiritual personal epiphanies. So, you know, the more that I embrace that part of myself and the more I embrace that experience of music, generally the happier I am and the more interested in the music that's coming out I become. And so that's kind of what this exploration, this is what a lot of what we've been talking about over this last week. And so the piece that you heard, Hymn to Aethon, is one of my first attempts to bring some of those ideas to other people, right? So how do I start to take this internal exploration of music and sound and the voice and start to share it um, with singers that aren't myself, right? Like, how do I put it on the page, or how do I work with them in person to get the sort of sounds that I'm looking for as an expressive part of the piece itself, right? I mean, I think we understand this in lots of other genres of music, that we understand that, you know, again, going back to sort of the rock band thing, so many guitarists, like the sound that they create, the kind of distortion that they use, and all that kind of stuff is an integral part of the piece, right? In fact, we know for sure that, like, if you suddenly play a really heavy rock song on an acoustic guitar, it sounds weird. And similarly, if you've got like an acoustic folk song that's usually done with like guitar and fiddle and things like that, and you suddenly translate it over to guitar, drums, and bass, it sounds super weird, right? It's just like a totally different experience. The sound of the instruments themselves are an integral part of the expressive nature of the piece. So, so how do we translate that over to the sort of this classical music, and specifically to choral music, right? Because we're all dealing with one kind of instrument. So, you know, for many composers, they consider the voice like a singular timbre, one quality of sound, and it's like that singularly sound. And the voice itself is such a versatile instrument that it's capable of all this like wild color of expression, that I wanted to bring those in to the piece. So what you saw was in that particular work was 4 or 5 different sound worlds that were layered on top of each other, right? So you had like the sort of I think Julian mentioned that it was inspired a little bit by my own personal love of hard rock and heavy metal. So you get a sort of like guitar riff that's happening in the lower voices, the han dan digga digga da han dan digga digga da han, that kind of thing. And then you get the more traditional choral sound, the oh, and those go right on top of each other to, you know, and then sometimes they like crescendo and explode into the wah, which one of the students recently reminded me is like a Waluigi thing, if you're familiar with that character, which I totally lean into and embrace. I think that that's great. And also, and then there were some other sorts of like kinds of things that we see in electronic music, right? Where there's these sort of filter sweeps of the sound that. So I'm wanting to take all that symphonic color and all those sorts of like electronic effects and be able to put them in a single piece of music as part of the expression of the piece. So that's kind of what that was about. And I wonder if there are any, you know, if there are any questions about the piece. I know there's some issues with the sound online right now, but if there are any questions from people in the lobby, or for people that are watching online, if you want to type them into the YouTube chat, or I guess you can tell Dr. Bryson and he can pass them along or something like that, feel free. Otherwise, I was going to share with you a little piece that that I have been working on, and I'm sorry if the people that are at home aren't able to hear the piece. So this is going to be a performance for those in the lobby. So this is a part of a set of pieces that I've been working on for voice and live electronic processing. Everything that you hear is generated by the voice. There are no purely electronic sounds, but there are some like loopers and delays and things like that. But otherwise, everything is just about creating different layers of textures with the voice itself. So this piece is called Warped by Choral, and I'll see if I can share it with you now. So that's that. And such a funny such a funny experience to sort of be doing this solo performance, and I have no idea if anyone's can hear it. But I think one of the things that I enjoy about this practice is that it's, as I was saying, this is sort of, I get to enjoy this as an internal experience. And it's something that I hope is meaningful to other people who are listening on the outside, and then they can sort of enjoy it alongside. But yeah, it's a funny thing to kind of work in this format, and have no idea if things are working out. I know that there were some sound issues and things like that, but I wonder if there are any sort of any other sort of like questions or thoughts around this idea of new music and acoustic exploration and physicality, things like that. Just I want to leave some space for it before we sort of pull apart a little bit more of what I was doing. Yeah. I don't know, Dr. Bryson, if you're able to relay any sort of questions. Great.
We are here in the lobby and we've been listening very carefully. Those at home had some issues, but
okay.
We worked them out. So I think they're hearing now.
Great.
Feel free to add a question into the live stream chat, but be aware it takes about 12 seconds before that gets to anyone. And if there's anyone here in the house who would like to ask any questions, we can relay them back and forth. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Well, come on over.
Oh, this is so great. This is very Maury Povich.
Yes.
People are, yeah.
How has your background affected the music that you make?
You mean like my ethnic background?
Yeah.
Well, so that's a great question. So, I mean, I come from a Middle Eastern heritage. My mother is from Bahrain, which is a little island country off the coast of Saudi Arabia. And my father is from Iran. And my grandmother's from India. So I'm sort of a Middle Eastern mutt, just kind of all over the Middle East. I think there's some Turkish in there also. And, and I definitely am drawn to music that's really drone based. I love music that's kind of based on a certain sort of harmonic foundation, and that gives a platform for individual melodic lines and solos and things like that. Like kind of like raga music is a good example of that, and so is Persian classical music is a lot like that. And so for me, it's not my training. My training, right, is entirely in Western classical music and in like the blues and rock and roll. And so for me, I grew up listening to a little bit of that like Middle Eastern music, you know, just because it's like what my parents enjoyed sometimes and things like that. But I've only recently in my life formally studied some of the Persian classical music. So, you know, so for me, I was interested in these sounds, but I didn't want to sort of imitate them without understanding what I was really doing and doing a real service. You know, I don't want to say like, oh, I'm writing in the Persian classical music style or in that heritage, because it's not really true. But my music is informed by some of those aesthetics, and and so for me, you know, I sort of apply Western concepts of harmony to these drone-based ideas. So whereas like a lot of drone music is based on a single note or like two notes, a root and a fifth, if you want to get technical about it, I'm really interested in music that uses thicker harmonic structures, like big chords and things like that, to um, to be like a more, what's the word, like a more rich harmonic base for that sort of solo improvisation. And that's actually, it's great, so great that you asked this. It's almost like Dr. Bryson asked you to ask this exact question. That's exactly what the living meditation is that we're going to be finishing tonight's concert with. It is, you know, just the whole piece is a pure drone, kind of for as long as we want. I mean, the piece can last 2 or 3 minutes, and it or it can last 10 minutes, or, you know, I've done this piece as sort of like a tuning and meditative exercise, and people do it for 20 minutes, no problem. They lie down, they close their eyes, and they sing. And so for this, where you're going to hear the choirs creating a harmonic drone, and then through some totally bizarre miracle of technology that takes at least 6 computers and like 3 different live streams, I will try to join them as a soloist. And so I will be singing with the choir with like a 30-second delay. And then some of the singers in the choir will also be joining me with occasional solo moments as well. So sort of a long answer to your question, but some of that like kind of cultural exposure from my childhood and from my upbringing has made its way into my music. And then of course, a lot of my music thematically is based around like Islamic ideas. I'm currently writing an entire oratorio that's based on the Conference of the Birds, which is an old Sufi epic poem that sort of describes the soul's search for truth, and as one way of kind of talking about that story. And that's very much like a deep part of like Persian and Islamic literature and history. So that part definitely informs some of the thematic stuff, but the music itself is, I mean, I was born and raised in like the Pacific Northwest, and that music is what's in my ear. And again, it's what's my training. So even when I'm dealing with those sorts of themes, the music itself tends to still be very much Western. Yeah. So I think we're getting kind of close to getting back in the hall. Let me know if we have time for any other questions. Otherwise, you know, we can just keep going if anyone else has anything that they want to ask.
Fahad, I think we're about ready to go back in the hall now.
Okay, so we're getting ready to go back in the hall.
Yes,
Wonderful. So I will mute my mic, and I will see you back in the concert, and I will join you for the last piece.
Thank you, Maestro.
Okay.